One thing that most of my clients have in common is that they want to labor at home as long as possible, trying to avoid being at the hospital longer than they need to in the safest way possible. One of the biggest things that we work on together is how to know when it's actually time to leave to go to the hospital and make this statement true. So in this video, I'm going to share with you 5 different tips that you can utilize to know when it's the right time to go to the hospital. Hey mama, welcome back to my channel. My name is Chanel. I am a doula and I help families go from a place of feeling really overwhelmed, anxious, unprepared by the whole process of natural birth to walking into birth feeling educated and empowered and excited to have a very peaceful, natural, beautiful birth experience with just the 2 of them having the tools that they need to do it and to advocate for themselves in the process of it. So if that sounds like something that you're interested in, make sure to hit the subscribe button below where we talk all about that on this channel, and check out my Work Your Birth program down below in the description, and I will walk with you and your partner every step of the way from pregnancy through birth, through postpartum, to give you everything that you need to have the experience that you desire. Now, as somebody who has had a hospital birth, a birth center birth, and a home birth, one of the most stressful things that I've had to experience is knowing when to leave. The first time I left way too early. Like, I actually went to the hospital because my water broke and I shouldn't have actually been there because I was not in labor. The second time I went into labor, I went to the birth center still probably a little earlier than I should have, which caused me to feel a little bit overwhelmed by laboring at the birth center longer than I actually wanted to. And in my 3rd labor, we actually gave birth at home, and the anxiety that I did not have to deal with when thinking about having to leave my home changed everything for me. And with all of those experiences, I've been able to really create some very clear guidelines to know when it's time for my clients to leave so that they can avoid a lot of the mistakes that I did in my first 2 labors when it came to going to the hospital or birth center too early. Now, I want to preface this video by reminding you that you should always follow your gut instinct. If you feel like it is time for you to go to the hospital or leave your home, you should do just that. These tips are guidelines, encouragement, suggestions for you to have in your back pocket. All of the things that you utilize in labor should hopefully come from an informed place. You're becoming educated from a professional who's done what you want to do and can give you encouragement and suggestions and guidelines to do the things that they've been able to do themselves or for their clients. So as you're learning from me on this channel, always make sure that you're trusting yourself with the tools that you have so that you know what feels best for you. So the first tip that I want to share with you on knowing when it's actually time to go to the hospital is understanding your contraction pattern. Your contraction pattern will tell you a lot about if it's time to go. During early labor, your contractions will be pretty mild, moderate, they'll be spread out pretty far, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes apart or even longer. This is obviously not the time to go to the hospital. You probably want to stay at home until you're in at least active labor. As you are seeing your labor progress, you want to see and notice that as you're timing your contractions, they're getting closer together consistently, they are getting longer than 1 minute consistently, and they are happening frequently. That means that we are trying to get ourselves into active labor before we leave our home. That means your contractions are at a 4-1-1 pattern. They're 4 minutes apart, lasting for 1 minute, and this has been happening for over an hour. This is not necessarily the time that you have to get up and leave your house, but try to get yourself to a point where you can stay at home until at least active labor, and that way you can really know when you do show up at the hospital that you are in active labor, because things can pick up and go quickly at that point. But getting to active labor can definitely take a little bit of time. So paying attention to your contraction pattern, I talk a lot about this in my program, and I actually talk about this in my Stages of Labor series of when you should try to leave to go to the hospital to really keep yourself at home as long as possible. But getting to active labor at that 4-1-1 point is definitely the earliest that I would encourage anybody going to the hospital. Now, there are a lot of factors that you want to take into consideration, which we'll talk about in this video, but just looking at your contraction pattern, you will know we're heading in the right direction if my contractions are starting to get closer together consistently. This is not 6 minutes apart, 8 minutes apart. This is we're getting closer to contractions being 1 minute or longer, and they are getting closer to that 4-minute mark. And we're seeing that happen consistently, and you're feeling the strength of them increase over time. Now, the second tip I want to share with you when it comes to knowing when it's time to leave for the hospital is looking at your bodily fluids. As labor progresses, you will start to see more bodily fluids. This doesn't happen for every single person. Sometimes second, third, fourth time moms don't see as many bodily fluids as they may have in the first pregnancy or the first labor. So this is not true for every single person, but it is pretty common for a lot of first time moms. Your bodily fluids will increase over the course of your labor. And this can freak a lot of moms out because they're seeing mucus plug, they're seeing bloody show, and then that makes them really worried. Rightfully so. If you're not educated about this process and nobody told you to be prepared for that, that can seem really scary. If you're wiping when you go to the bathroom and you see blood on the toilet paper. But those are actually really good things. They're really good signs that your labor is progressing. If we have that labor contraction pattern that we want to see, and we're seeing a lot more bodily fluids, maybe even your water breaking as your contractions start to get more intense, these are really good signs that we're getting really close. If not, we're at that point that we should be heading to the hospital. But what I want to call out here is that if your water breaks before labor begins, this is not automatically a reason for you to rush to the hospital. This was my mistake in my first labor. My water broke while I was at work, and I was so excited. But nobody told me that you shouldn't be going to the hospital because your water breaks, especially if you're not in labor. I was under the impression that I was gonna get this infection if I didn't go to the hospital, and that if my water broke, my baby's gonna come sliding out right after that, because that's what I saw in the movies, and nobody educated me on that. I didn't get that information in my hospital birth class. My OB didn't tell me those things, so I just had no clue. Now, knowing what I know, I understand why sometimes our water breaks in the beginning, how rare it actually is for most women. It only happens to 10 to 14% of women. And also that that's not ideal and how we want labor to start, and that we don't actually have to rush to the hospital just because our water breaks. So you got to get educated on this topic. There are things that you need to look at when it comes to your water breaking. I have a whole video on this that you can check out, but you have to understand what information you need to look at when your water breaks, and that will determine whether or not you should be rushing into the hospital. But if your water does break, let's say in active labor or as the contractions start to pick up, that could be a really good sign, especially if the contractions are pretty strong at that point, that we're heading towards transition. If you are really in the swing of labor, or if you're already at the hospital and you're in the full swing of labor, you've gotten there already, and then your water breaks, these are really good signs. So understanding bodily fluid in labor is super important and a good tip to keep in mind when you're thinking about where I'm at in labor, and also should I be leaving to go to the hospital right now. The third tip that you need to understand when it comes to understanding whether or not you should be leaving to go to the hospital is the feeling of rectal pressure. Now I want to show you what this actually means, because a lot of times what you may see or experience or hear is that a lot of times women will talk about feeling like they have to poop. And that is a very common sentiment or experience or feeling that moms get when they have the urge to push. But that isn't always necessarily true for every single person, especially if it does not line up with the other two things that we just talked about, which is contraction pattern and other bodily fluids. Because as your baby does get lower into the pelvis, you're going to start to feel more pressure overall in general. But once your baby gets low enough into the pelvis, they're gonna put some weight against your rectum. And what that does is it causes you to feel like you have to poop. Now, if you are not feeling rectal pressure yet, then you probably have a little bit more time to go. Most of the moms that I work with who are having natural births, they will start to feel rectal pressure when it's time to start that journey or transition process to pushing. It doesn't mean if you feel rectal pressure, you're gonna have a baby in 5 minutes. That's not what it means. But it is a good sign that if you are still at home and you're feeling rectal pressure, you should probably get in the car and head to the hospital, especially given all the other factors that we'll talk about in just a second. However, if you're feeling rectal pressure but your contractions are still 10 minutes apart, maybe you actually do need to go to the bathroom. And what can happen sometimes is that we'll feel this rectal pressure because somebody told us if we have rectal pressure, that means that we have to go to the hospital right away because we're about to push our baby out. But if your contractions are 10 minutes apart and they're only lasting 30 to 40 seconds, there's a good chance that that's probably not the case. You may actually have to go to the bathroom. And if you're just holding your poop in or your pee in throughout labor, that can actually hold your baby up from actually descending to get to the point where they're actually putting pressure on your rectum. So trying to consistently empty your body throughout labor will help give your baby space to actually descend into the pelvis. And then you'll have an accurate understanding and feeling of your contraction pattern, that your baby's getting lower and you're feeling more pressure, and that rectal pressure is truly the rectal pressure that you want to be true for labor. You may already be at the hospital or your birthing center when you feel this rectal pressure, so keep that in mind, that rectal pressure is a good sign as well. But also pair those things up and understand what's actually going on in your body. The fourth thing that you need to understand when it comes to knowing when to leave your house to go to the hospital in labor is your commute. This is the one piece of feedback and comment that I get the most when I talk about staying at home as long as possible. People are like, well, my commute is 45 minutes and my commute is an hour and my commute is 25 minutes. That is something that we all have to take into consideration. There are many of my clients, because I live in a large city, that are going to be driving 25 minutes to get to their birthing location. And that is a very normal commute here where I live in Texas. A 25-minute commute is not something that we need to rush for. 25 minutes is not a long commute in the birthing space. If you're feeling rectal pressure, yeah, go ahead and get in the car, but you don't need to speed 100 miles down the road, because that just brings danger, anxiety, and stress, and can slow down the entire labor process. But if you understand or know that you have a 45-minute plus commute, then waiting until you feel rectal pressure is probably not the best idea. Maybe we're waiting until we get to that 411 pattern, that active labor pattern, to start heading to the hospital. Not speeding or rushing because we've all of a sudden got a 411 pattern, but maybe it's time to start making that transition a little bit earlier, especially when you're thinking about the time of day, because sometimes rush hour traffic needs to be considered and all of those things. But I do want to encourage you, still wait at home as long as possible, even if you have a little bit more of a lengthy commute, because when your body transitions from home to a different location, sometimes if you leave too early, it can slow down the process and you have to kind of get back into your groove, into your birth zone when you get there. And you're almost like not starting the process over, because you're not starting the process over, but you have to find your zone again to get back into that pattern. And it can get really frustrating and overwhelming when that happens. So trying to wait at home where you really have a good groove and a good pattern there before you head into your birthing location is a good idea, so that you can avoid those stalls or those slowdowns that sometimes happen when we're transitioning locations. And yes, car babies happen. I have had moms who have had car babies safely because they were educated, and we actually talk about if you give birth in the car on accident, if your baby decides to come faster at home, how you do that. I've literally had all of these situations happen with women who have supported, and their babies were born very safely in a car or at home, or they made it to the hospital right in time to have a baby. And that is obviously not the goal, is to live life on the edge, but having knowledge in any scenario so you're prepared for all of those scenarios. And the fifth tip that I want to share with you on knowing when it's time to leave your house to go to the hospital in labor is if something doesn't feel right. And this goes back to the first thing that I said in this video, which is to trust your intuition. But if you're educated on this process, the birthing process, from a very reliable source, and you trust your body and you are in tune with your body, you will know if something feels off. Even if this is your first birth and you understand and you're learning about this process and you're listening to your body and your baby throughout the entire thing, you can trust that your body will give you cues or signs that something is off about this. Something feels weird, something doesn't feel right, and you should always trust that intuition. I have seen moms be like, yeah, I know my contractions aren't 411, but something doesn't feel right. I just feel like I need to head in. My gut is telling me that we need to head in. And they're absolutely right. All of these other things that we've talked about are null and void if something is not right. If something doesn't feel right, if you know what you should be experiencing and you're not experiencing those things, you have to listen to yourself first. But sometimes what I see on the flip side of that is that moms are not knowledgeable, they're not educated, and they get really scared when things start to get stronger, and then they rush into the hospital and everything is fine, but it's because they didn't know what they were supposed to be actually experiencing and they didn't know what to expect. So there's a difference between rushing because you're scared and rushing because you know something is actually wrong. Some of the things that you should be paying attention to throughout the labor process is that your baby is continuously moving. If you're in labor and you notice that your baby has not moved for a while, you should absolutely go to the hospital right away. No matter what the contraction pattern is, no matter how strong or not strong they are, if you're doing things and you're not feeling your baby move, because they will continue to move throughout labor, that's a sign that something could be going on and we need to look into that. If you're bleeding and filling up a pad, that is not normal bloody show. Bloody show is like light bleeding, just wipe, see a little bit of pink, see a little bit of red, but not filling up a pad. If you're filling up a pad, there's something wrong and you should be seen. If you are having discharge, other bodily fluids that are thick tar-like brown or they're green, that is a sign that your baby could be in distress or there could be some meconium, and we should probably go get that checked out to make sure that everything is okay with you and your baby. In all of these cases, if you get checked out at the hospital and everything looks fine, you can always go back home. But it's better to be safe rather than sorry in these situations, especially if something is not right. If you're feeling a lot of pain, and this is not like, oh, my contractions are super, super strong, I can't handle them pain. Yes, go in, of course, if you feel that way and you need to get medication, epidural, whatever the case may be for you. But if you know you want to have a natural birth and you're like, this pain feels weird, like this feels off, this is not what I expected, and I feel like something feels like sharp pain or it's like a shooting pain or something, then you should definitely go get that checked out. Trust your intuition, trust your gut in all of this, and be knowledgeable in the process so you can make informed decisions rather than fearful decisions. Always, always, always trust yourself. And it's so much easier to trust yourself when you know you have a knowledge base and a foundation that helps you to work from that, so that you know you're not just working out of a fear-based mindset rather than an informed-based mindset. All right, y'all, those are the 5 tips that I want you to keep in mind when it comes to laboring at home longer and knowing exactly when it's time to leave the hospital. If you want me to walk with you step by step in this and really dig into the details of positioning and labor positions and stages of labor and timing contractions, and if you actually stay at home so long, you do so well that you need to know how to deliver your baby just in case they come a little bit faster, we talk about that too. And you can check out my Work Your Birth program below, and we will schedule a free consultation, talk about what your plans are and how I can support you and your partner along this journey from pregnancy through birth into postpartum, to make sure you have the tools that you need to have the experience that you desire. I hope all of this information was very helpful for you. If it was, make sure to hit that thumbs up button so I know, and let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are on staying at home as long as possible. Is this what your goals are? Are you giving birth in a hospital? Are you trying to get there really fast? What makes you most afraid? I want to know all the things that you're thinking about, and this gives me also ideas on different videos to make so that I can continue to educate you along this journey. All right, y'all, that is it from me. I will see you on the next video.